Good afternoon. My name is Kiecha Berzins, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications here at FoodLogiQ. We're so glad you could join us today for our industry webinar, which is entitled Active Managerial Control at the System Level and the Operational Level. And we have two terrific guests with us today who have a wealth of knowledge to share on the topics of food safety and specifically the practice of active managerial control, or short, AMC. On the screen, you'll see the registration information and the dial-in number and access code. Due to the large number of participants today, phone lines will remain muted during the presentation. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please submit those at any time using the questions panel. We will answer those at the end of the webinar. So for those of you who may not be familiar with FoodLogiQ, our company has spent years developing solutions that meet complex issues facing our ever-changing global food chain, as well as the vast web of regulations that face all modern food companies. At FoodLogiQ, our mission is to map the world's food chain, to make it as safe as possible, and empower people to make informed decisions about food safety. Our technology enables supply management, food safety compliance, quality incident management, recall management, and whole chain traceability, all on a single platform called Connect, which was built really exclusively for the food industry. So as I mentioned today, our webinar is hosted by FoodLogiQ, is entitled Active Managerial Control at the System Level and Operational Level. And during this webinar, attendees will learn the fundamentals of active managerial control, such as a written food safety plan, a well-defined standard operating procedures plan, and our clear education and training plan that employees can follow. So I'm really pleased to introduce our guests for today's discussion, Mr. Eric Moore and Dr. Ben Chapman. Eric is the Director of Food Safety and Regulatory Compliance at Testo Solutions North America, which is a valued business partner at FoodLogiQ. Eric is a public health advocate and a well-known food safety subject matter expert, and for the past 18 years, he's been a proactive leader in improving the food safety education, policies, and procedures at multiple industry-leading food service and retail organizations, including Albertsons, Safeway, Aramark, and Compass Group. And Eric is the vice chair for the Retail and Food Service Professional Development Group with International Association of Food Protection. He's the co-chair of the CFP Sponsorship Committee and a contributing member of the Association of Food and Drug Officials, the Industry Associate Committee, the NSF Joint Committee for Food Equipment, and the American Frozen Foods Institute Food Safety Working Group. We're really pleased to have you, Eric, today. And can you tell us a little bit more about Testo and what your company does?
Sure. Thank you, Kiecha. Thank you, Ben, as well, for the opportunity to be here with both of you. For those on the webinar that aren't familiar with who Testo is, the organization is 60 years old, and we are a leader and innovator in measurement solutions. Our North American headquarters are in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and our global headquarters are in the Black Forest of Germany, if you're familiar with that region of Germany. It's very close to Switzerland. We are a market leader in portable measurement technology. We have helped over 650,000 customers worldwide save time, resources, protect the environment, ensure their product quality, and meet regulatory expectations and increase the value of their goods and services. So switching from a paper to a digital or electronic food safety plan and record collection process has both the potential to provide significant benefit across all business levels, as well as lowering costs, improving visibility throughout an organization, and creating control where it once was considered virtually impossible to have controls applied. Testo has integrated our advanced instrumentation into its cloud-based solutions technology called Severus. This software not only enables local and global collection of both temperature data and product quality, it is able to integrate routine what were at one point redundant checklists and log-taking activities into a handheld temperature or a handheld device. So that's just a little snapshot of who we are. I'm happy to share more offline with anybody that has the interest. So.
Thank you so much, Eric, and we're thrilled that Eric and Testo are partnering with us on a series of webinars, and Eric will be joining us. Just like last month, he will be joining us for future webinars, and we're very pleased to have that collaboration. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Ben Chapman to our webinar. Ben is an associate professor and a food safety extension specialist at North Carolina State University. Ben says that as a teenager, Saturday afternoon viewing of a classic cable news outbreak sparked his interest in pathogens and public health. That's good Saturday afternoon watching.
What?
With the goal of lowering the number of foodborne illnesses, Eric's group designs, implements, and evaluates food safety strategies, messages, and media from farm to fork. Ben co-hosts a bi-weekly podcast called Food Safety Talk, and he publishes a food safety blog called Barf Blog. So Ben, thank you for being with us today. Please take a minute to tell us a bit about your role at North Carolina State University and this Barf Blog. That sounds interesting.
Sure, thanks Kiecha, and thanks Eric for the invite. So as a food safety extension specialist, a lot of what I do is really focusing on supporting individuals in the food service industry and the retail industry around food safety strategies, conduct evidence-based research in those areas, and also do a lot of work with consumer food handling as well. And in the world of food service and retail, it's really hard to sort of excise what consumers do and what consumers expect from how we react in those settings. So Barf Blog as well has been around for over 10 years, and was a collaboration with one of my close colleagues and former advisors, Doug Powell, and it was a place for us, and is a place for us, to take goings-on in the world of food safety and talk about them from a sometimes popular culture standpoint and sometimes an academic standpoint, but it was sort of just our way to engage people around food safety dialogues. So a lot of what I do from day to day is create strategies, work with the industry partners on what's the best way to implement food safety in their businesses, and then also and right now is a sort of perfect example, work with consumers in events like a impending hurricane situation, and figure out the best way to keep them safe and get good food safety messages.
Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning before the webinar began, you're working with, 22 counties right now?
Quite a bit, yeah. Here in North Carolina, our easternmost counties, really focused on getting. We know that there will be power outages and through sort of this rain and wind, dangerous wind event, and so just getting information about the best way to get to handle food and handle food during a power outage. And it's not just consumers. We often get questions from businesses, both chain and independents, on what do we do? Our cooler's out, and it's been out for 40 hours. What can we keep, and what do we have to dispose of?
Providing a valuable resource to consumers and businesses. That's great. And as far as for the Barf Blog, are people just able to Google that?
Sure can. Okay. Barfblog.com. And you can subscribe to Barf Blog and get daily updates or weekly digests.
Great. Good to know. Okay. Well, we're glad to have you with us. I'd like to thank both of you, and our FoodLogiQ team is really happy to have both of you here to share your expertise on active managerial control. But before we get into the weeds of discussing the intricacies of ANC and exactly how that works, let's talk a little bit about a broader topic, food safety and its importance to both the consumer and to the food safety industry. On the screen, you'll see a pretty sobering dollar figure, which is the average cost of a food recall to a food company, and that's $10 million. That's a pretty shocking number, and that number is an estimate of the financial damage, the brand damage, and most importantly, the damage to consumers as a result of a serious food safety incident. So I'm sure our listeners would like your thoughts about the fallout from this kind of event, because I'm sure when people see that figure, that's the first thing they think. Ben, would you like to share with us your?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when we think about these incidents and these events, you have that very quick, direct cost of, okay, how do I get the product off the shelves? What are we going to do in the my buyers and as they're removing it and disposing of it? How are we going to handle those costs? And then we have the cost of stopping production, transport costs. I mean, it's kind of that immediate shock, I think, is makes up a big portion of this. But as you mentioned, Kiecha, you've got these other issues like recovery from it and loss of trust in not only in your brand with consumers, but also loss of trust in the business-to-business side of things, and how recalls are handled by suppliers, I think often play into buyers' minds on whether they're going to keep stocking that product or look for other suppliers for it. I think what we've seen in recent years is we get a pretty good sense of the large product recalls, and whether there's a failure in processing or some contamination happens. But I think increasingly now we're getting better at in the public health realm at linking ingredients to larger recalls, and so now you've got situations going back to 2009 with peanut butter from the Peanut Corporation of America, and in that situation where you've got like that ingredient is in hundreds and hundreds of products. Now everybody's dealing with recalls, and it's throwing retailers for a loop, and it's that the whole supply chain kind of gets painted under these issues. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we're looking at figures in $10 million, because there are all these sort of exceptional fallout issues that happen just after let's get it off the shelves.
And this is really a ripple effect, isn't it, Eric?
It is, and I would say, that figure of 10 million. I mean, that if you take even a broader look, like the spinach recall or the leafy greens, or the impact to the leafy greens industry, a couple of years ago with the spinach recall, I believe the estimated economic impact of that was $2 billion to that entire industry. So these incidents they have broader impact than just on this isolated local, whether it's a restaurant or a distribution center or a regional level. As our economy is turning into a legitimate global-based economy, those situations like this are having bigger and bigger ripple effects across the entire global, across the entire globe, and it's just going to continue. And what I think rather than look at like what are some of the effects, internally within our group in Testo, we like to take a different sort of mindset. It is, how can we use this, right, as a method to focus more on prevention, right? What can we do to try and make this so it doesn't happen again, or develop whether it's a sensor or some sort of automated protocol or system or checklist or just something. I know I personally take it almost as a call to arms, is, listen, how can we help the rest of our industry, get better so that these things become less frequent than they are, because the detection technology is going to continue to, become better and better and better. That just means that, whether it's sanitation protocols or, zoning requirements within a production facility, or, at the operational level, effective sanitization of food contact surfaces and things. All of that needs to improve and try and keep pace with detection methods and things like that. So. And
as you said, so much of this, we know that so many of these food incidents are preventable. And so we're talking about, really specifically today, we're going to narrow it down to the operator level. And ironically, these costs really drastically outweigh the price tag of that various prevention and control measures that are currently available to the food industry through Testo, through FoodLogiQ, and through a number of different technologies that are available today. Proactive management of food safety practices by managers and supervisors in food retail and food service environments, formerly known as active managerial control, is recognized as one of the most effective ways to control foodborne illness risk factors. The most recently published version of the FDA Model Food Code in 2017 now places greater emphasis on persons in charge and their duty to consistently ensure that foodborne illness risk factors are controlled, having a written manual of procedures or a written plan. Ben, can you provide us with some background on what active managerial control is and sort of the process for that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've been practicing different versions or different iterations of active managerial control in the food service and retail sectors for a long time. I mean, it's not a new concept whatsoever. One of the things that we're focusing on as we look at active managerial control is whether you have all the people who are there knowing what the hazards are, what the risks are, and those are kind of two different things. Like, we can look at hazards that pop up all the time, but the risk, the chance that it's going to happen, and where those deficiencies might be or vulnerabilities in certain cases, but really focusing on that. And so you've got to have someone there who can identify those things. And sometimes when I say there, I mean, we look at organizations it could be just a small independent restaurant that practices active managerial control, or it could be a large multinational food service chain. And it's just that there's someone there that's actively looking for where could things go wrong. That's kind of like step one. And then systematically putting things in place to address all the things that could go wrong or likely to go wrong. And then having a way to sort of track whether they're hitting those targets, right? So you've got this, like, what are the things, what do we really need to focus on to address those things, and how, having some measurement system, some way to know, okay, are we actually doing it? And then the last, I guess, bucket of things when I think about active managerial control is, how do I get all of my employees and staff to do the stuff that we are going to track to see whether we're actually addressing food safety? And truthfully, it sounds like, when you kind of distill it down into like 4 bullets, it sounds really simple. In a practical sense, it's not. It gets really complicated, and there are lots of barriers and challenges to it. But it's kind of the way that we know is the best approach for food safety. And the derivative of HACCP, or the cousin of HACCP, whatever we want to call it, it's similar in that approach, where they're both very systematic. But you have someone there who can identify what are the hazards and what are the risks.
But for every organization, it's different. So that's probably where the complexity comes in as well. Is that what you said is a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And I'd even go beyond that and say, for every time an organization, a firm, creates a new menu item, it's different. And so you may have a really great active managerial control program. Let's not even call it a plan, but you've got something there that says, okay, we're looking at these things, and now we're gonna change our business model just slightly. And you really need to go back and revisit that plan to make sure that you haven't missed something with this new change. So that's, yeah, absolutely. There are lots of places where it can get quite complicated.
Eric, what's your experience with active managerial control and your perspective from the Testo perspective.
So, I've always viewed active managerial control, and this is sort of prior to this being, the additional or expanded emphasis by the most recently published portion, Food Code, putting more emphasis in place. It's kind of an unwritten component of a organization's overall management program, right? So it's like an output, if you will, of the people who are spearheading those plans or programs at an operational level. Excuse me. Now that it's more formal, it's really in your best interest to consider that you're going to be evaluated on the level of compliance an organization would have to some level of written or communicated plan to all of your employees by the various regulatory agencies across the U.S. That's a big challenge for them, right? Because they're having to, and they've been doing it for some time, like trying to figure out, like, how do we assess this, since it's not look, that temperature, it either is or it isn't at the right point, right? There's a lot of, call them expectations or methodologies, or that embody active managerial control, that it's really hard to assess that, and it's hard to implementation of it. So I kind of look back in my career, and I think I've been fortunate to experience active managerial control from a couple of different perspectives. The first being like the actual, like, I call it the person in charge, for lack of better ways to explain it. When I was working at a convention center, I was responsible for food safety for everything that happened within that building, and there was a lot to control. There was a lot of training. There was a lot of education. There was a lot of there were a lot of misses. There were a lot of things that went wrong, and figuring out how to make corrections on the fly and things like that. So you start to learn a great deal of how to actively make changes in the moment to ensure that control stays in place. And then as my career progressed, I had the opportunity to be in positions where I started to get to write some of these programs and plans, and trying to simplify the processes that any type of whether it's basic or some advanced food safety management plan or program, being able to start to sort of engineer risk out of the system is this mentality that I started to adopt. And I took that, from actually doing it, being the boots on the ground, to sitting in offices and talking to people and figuring out how to devise these programs and plans to make them more user friendly and effective. And so I think as time moves on, that these programs, plans, systems, methodologies, what have you, I think what will be able to happen is that as organizations, regardless of size, when they're able to start to adopt new ways of solving time established challenges, like communication or time management, or just sharing knowledge, I think that's where, like, the biggest improvements in operational level active managerial control, like, it's kind of like we'll almost be able to see it, call it like a golden era, where there's stuff that we haven't even thought about that when those tools or systems or devices come along, they'll really be able to I think help make vast improvements. So,
Eric, you touched on some of the challenges, and you just mentioned time management and communication. What are some of the challenges that operators, those people in charge, what are they facing when they're trying to establish active managerial control? Could you touch a little bit more on, or maybe elaborate on the time management and the communication piece of things?
Yeah, gladly. So, yeah, time management, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, or what you do. You're expected to do more with less, right? And that is that holds true in any corner of the food industry. Extremely true in the operations level in the food industry and retail and food service. A lot of times, there are just uncontrollable events. Like we're in the situation, or Ben more so than me, is in the situation in the coastal Carolinas where you're trying to communicate this severe weather pattern that's coming in. Well, you're going to have potential power outages, you're going to have call outs, but while all this is going on, the food still needs to be, the risks associated with the food, whether it's the food coming from a farm, a manufacturer, a supplier, or just your local, convenience store or grocery store, the risks of that product from point A to point Z still need to be controlled. And that takes time and effort. And you can't manufacture more time, as nice as that would be, right? But what happens is when you start getting it in, whether it's a severe weather event, or it's just your random Wednesday or Friday, around a college campus, in football season, and people have too good of a time on Friday night, and Saturday you have 4 call-outs. Well, as the manager of an establishment, what are you going to do, right? Like you automatically are behind the 8 ball. So, more often than not, the first things that start to get disregarded or not paid as much attention to typically are the time-consuming processes like documenting refrigeration temperatures, or washing dishes, right? The dishes are just going to pile up. I'll get to them later. I'll have somebody come in tonight. And that's when situations, when risks start to creep into operational situations. And, that loss of control over one or multiple risk factors is what at times can lead to really unfortunate events. So, being able to do more with the same or less from a people, a people management or, a people perspective, or an interaction perspective, I think systems or processes or programs that are able to do that can really be good support pillars for the entire concept of implementing and maintaining an active managerial control environment in the food service industry, is effectively being able to manage your time or the time within the system. So, good example, today's digital management systems, they can support this by, reducing these, time-intensive, redundant tasks. Take, for example, automated temperature monitoring systems, where, in speaking with a chef from a regional, a national high-end restaurant chain, we're sitting and just chatting about their general food safety program, and I flat out asked him, how much time do you spend on a daily basis documenting refrigeration temperatures? And he looked at me and he said, it's the first 2 hours of my day every single day that I come to work. And now that's just him, right, where it should, I would say technically be done more than just once a day. But being able to take that activity away from that individual and have it run in the background and only provide notification when there's a problem, you're giving that person back time, right? You're not manufacturing more, but you're giving them back time, and I would actually argue this to business owners or business managers. You're paying people to either you pay an executive chef for their skills and their ability to create these wonderful, amazing, tasty foods for your customers. You don't pay them to do refrigeration logs, right? So having that activity taken away from an executive chef, a line cook, a sanitation worker, whatever, and enabling them to give that back to their core job responsibilities, I think that there's a lot of value in that, right? Like they're doing what you're paying them to do, whether that's interacting with customers or preparing great food or what have you. Communication, I think is a challenge, again, as with time management, is a challenge that everyone faces, it regardless of the kind of job you have. It's how well does your organization communicate in order to get things done or to make improvements. In organization, Ben had kind of alluded to this, you could have the best food safety program ever written, but if you don't have an effective way to communicate what that plan is and what the policies or the programs or the actions within that program are, or what I like to consider the expectations of the program, it's inevitably it's not going to provide you the expectations or the results that you hope in any kind of sustainable method. So that communication in both a sort of on a two-way street, being able to develop a plan, get it out, educate people on the importance of it, and then train them on how to execute it is imperative. I would say any plan's success or failure hinders on that. But the communication channel has to go two ways, where you need to have the ability to receive feedback on what works, what doesn't work, so that you can sort of adopt this continuous improvement mentality. And that's where I think good companies are separated from great companies. So.
And you have worked with people all over North Carolina, 100 counties. Do you think that the challenges that operators face are geographically specific, or is this something that is pertinent to everybody?
I mean, it's definitely pertinent to everybody. There may be some geographic differences based on the types of foods that are produced. The supply chains may be somewhat different in different geographic locations. And as Eric knows as well, we often have, if I look at some of my colleagues who are in national brands or national chains, they deal with geographic issues because there may be different versions, different years of the food code that get applied. So they have to address all of those in their programs or situations, but not really. I mean, these are things, the stuff that Eric touched on are really issues that you could really walk into any food business, and I'd even go outside of retail and food service, our focus today, and everything that Eric talked about rings true. You have the same issues. You got different hazards and different risks to manage, but a systematic way to approach it, coming down to time management and communication. They're really important things. As I listen to Eric talk a little bit, there are a few things that come to mind, and it all really focuses for me around this issue of food safety. Keeping food safety is really a people issue, and you only have so many, and I think Eric articulated really well, you only have so much time and so many people to do this, and anything that you can do to get those people to focus on risks as opposed to other things that they're competing with can only make food safer. And people have to do the right things. They've got to be able to know what those risks are. They need to know how to manage them. They actually have to do it. But even step up to like a supervisor or managerial situation, you've got people there that need to look at data. They need to look at how well things are going and be able to do, in my world, in academic world, we look at that as like data analysis. I don't think that a manager at a restaurant's looking at what they do as data analysis, but as they look down their refrigeration temperature logs, but it's really what they're doing is like, why is this out of place? What is it about my system do I have to go fix? Is it someone just didn't look? Where are those gaps? Do we have an equipment issue? And so those are all like people things. So the more time you can give individuals to make those decisions, to me is so important in the world of food safety.
What are some examples of, I guess, the traditional tracking methods? People who are not using, or operators who aren't using technology.
Mm-hmm.
What are the standard procedures that people use to track, and what challenges have you found with those, and what do you think can help them overcome those challenges?
So, I mean, I think it's a really long continuum. That's the thing we have to always keep in mind here is you've got individuals on the very basic side of things that may not do any tracking at all. They're just like daily doing the same stuff, and they may be producing a really safe product just by chance. They may have a good informal system in place to do it, but they don't have any way to really know whether things are going right or wrong. And then
would that be more for smaller organizations, mom and pop type?
I would say no. I mean, I think this is my experience is that that you have some maybe big organizations out there, big institutions, different types of food businesses that are becoming more up to speed around food safety. But I don't have the expectation that everyone is sort of at this top end. As Eric said, that separation between good and great companies. I think there are some really good big companies that are still doing some informal type stuff and then hoping a lot. And I think that there are some very small businesses, and I work with independents probably more than I do major companies, because their questions, they don't have the same kind of infrastructure to handle the scientific questions. But there are some really, really good, like, one or two outlet businesses, 10, like a regional chain that they've got a food safety person, or a person who didn't even know that they're a food safety person, doing things in a really like great way. And so it's one of those things that, and that's from the traditional side of things, right? Like, and the more infrastructure around a business, I think the easier it is to track things, and if you have the right people there to make decisions on it. But that to me becomes this real important nexus, is the right person there with the right data, whether it's traditional or non-traditional.
Mm-hmm. And Eric, from your perspective, is the bulk of what you've seen up to this point, the large majority of people, do they do their tracking methods via paper?
Yeah, I would agree. And I would agree with the points that Ben was making. I would say, by and large, the food industry, more so at the consumer-facing end, so retail, grocery, and food service, restaurants, et cetera, they do tend to use paper-based record keeping, and paper-based management programs, and I just think that's just where things are right now, right? There's a lot of change in the industry, both from the regulatory perspective, as well as the industry perspective, but also from the supporting component of the industry, like the organization that I work for, where there's a lot of new tools, technology, systems, sensors, all these other things that are really starting to become A, affordable, and B, legitimate solutions to these traditional or historical challenges of collecting data that has existed for a long time. I would say some of the obstacles that those traditional or paper-based systems really have in place are incomplete or missing information, right? It's a term, it depends on sort of who you ask, and I'm sure Ben would agree. People either call it pencil whipping or dry labbing, but it's basically, the forging of records, right? Whether they're financial records or they're refrigeration temperature log records or cooking records, they're still records that you're supposed to be keeping, if that's part of your written, quote unquote, written plan that you're supposed to have. And when they are not being kept, that's a problem. And if they're being forged, that's a problem. A lot of the documentation requires some sort of management review or verification. And I would say, like in my roles, that is, well, I guess the first question you could ask is, are the records even being done? And if you use a decision matrix, right, and you answer the question yes, the next question is, are they up to date? Yes or no, right? And if you say yes to that, is, did the manager sign off that they were reviewed? I would say the vast majority, like, borderline more than 50% of the time, you could ask, an industry professional that is in some sort of, whether it's a food safety or a quality assurance role, I would hope that they would confer that managerial signature or sign off of review of that document is very few and far between consistently done. Again, and that sort of circles back to that time management thing, right? The manager might be walking around a store saying, yeah, the logs are all being done, but it's another component of any type of, legitimate food safety management plan is the constant review of, inventor data, right, or records, right, that somebody else might just call them records. You have to review that. Are people, because that's the component where the manager, the location manager, is saying, we're following the program, or, oh, look, we had a deviation, or we had something didn't happen right here. Did they follow the right predefined corrective action protocols that we have in place, or did they not, right? And then that becomes a teaching and educational moment, or, right, a reinforcement opportunity if they didn't do it. So that's another layer of active managerial control, right, that is vital. It's vital to the success of the program. The other hard thing, and in our last webinar, I mentioned this. I would spend upwards of 40 hours in any 1 month generating a monthly report of, basically the, weekly inspections that were completed by a third-party company at all of these retail grocery stores. It would take me alone 40 hours, right? That's a long damn time, right? Of just crunching. It was just me working in an Excel sheet, putting together something that I could then share. And I was a full-time employee designated for, that's all I did. Not everybody has that luxury, right? And again, it sort of shows it's that time management or commitment to spending the time doing this to ensure the program or the processes are being done. That's a hard thing to do. I think you do have a lot of, more proactive organizations out there, that have already started, there are a couple that I'm sure everybody hopefully the two people that are listening have on the top of their mind. They've been doing this for the better part of 5 or 6 years, where they were early adopters of these digital systems, these digital record-keeping systems. They've got troves and troves of data that help them continuously, review, revise, and improve their programs time after year, whether it's quarterly, yearly, biannual, however frequent it might be, but they're able to get better rather than just stay in place and, accept the status quo. They're sort of pushing the boundaries. And as, the food code now is placing more emphasis on prevention, right, or being proactive, that status quo mentality, I would say, is really going to start to, get sunsetted due to regulatory oversight, right? And I think it's for good measure. Companies are going to be forced to start to implement these proactive, preventative controls, like in the manufacturing world. Mm-hmm. It's completely, a component of the Food Safety Modernization Act. It's just a matter of time before that sort of trickles, the trickle down economy, right? The trickle down regulatory requirements. But I think once a company, realizes, some of the real long-term benefits, and they commit to implementing, some of these, technology solutions, or, food safety management system-based solutions, after sort of the break-in period, where any type of program or system like this, whether it's an SAP type of system or it's a system, it's focused on food safety or your supply chain, there's going to be a break-in period. But after that break-in period, you're going to really see some absolute legitimate benefits coming back to your business based on those improvements.
And that would include, automating temperature reporting, regular food safety assessments, real-time corrective actions, all those things that you talked about as far as having that direct oversight by operators and management. That can substantially lower the risk of foodborne illness. How can software solutions, and talking about, when folks are ready to make that move, and there might be some pain period there, but how can software solutions offered by companies like FoodLogiq and Testo help managers and owners more efficiently manage and execute their food safety practices?
So I would say I'll boil it down to I think the biggest impact is in visibility, right? Where once, whether it was me or one of my industry, industry counterparts, you're sitting in an office and you can just sit there and scratch your head and be like, oh, man, I have no idea what's going on in Seattle, right? And the only way for me to find out is either get on a plane, make phone calls, shoot emails off. When you begin to adopt this technology-based type of system or solution, you increase your visibility of, and I don't like using the word compliance, but in essence, that's what it is, right? It's what I have a legitimate line of sight into what is and isn't happening anywhere I want to look at any time, whether I'm sitting at home watching football on, Saturday or Sunday, or if I'm, at the beach. Well, maybe that's a bad example. Right? Thankfully, my wife isn't listening, and at least I don't think she is. And but you have access to this information, right? So you begin to break down these barriers of poor communication, right? And everything is kind of like interrelated, but these systems with their internet, their IoT enabled devices, like handheld thermometers, Kiecha, as you mentioned, stationary refrigeration data loggers, that can work in one place, or they can be used in transit. Those types of devices, they really provide line of sight to people in this public health profession within the industry. They provide a line of sight that has never ever been available, right? Unless you figured out how to clone yourself, right? Which, if you do, call me.
Well, we had a question. Someone's already submitted a question about that IoT component, so that's great that you addressed that. And then I'm curious from your perspective, because you work with people all over North Carolina, what percentage of operators would you say practice active managerial control? And to even get down a little bit more in the weeds, what percentage would you say at this point in time are using technology to help them?
It's a really great question. I don't know the answer to it from a evidence base. I don't have anything to point to kind of say here's what we know. I think when we look at the FDA's risk factor study and they start to look at those things, it's pretty high of individuals that are implementing some level of active managerial control. What I worry about in those numbers is it may be a little bit inflated because it's when someone's there to check for it. And I think if we look at active managerial control, the whole philosophy behind it is this happening day in and day out. And I think the numbers when someone's there asking about it are not nearly as high as what happens on a Friday night when there's a bunch of teenagers there that are working.
Or it's not what's happening when a regulatory agent official is in your establishment, right?
Exactly.
Because everybody tenses up, right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing that right?
Mm-hmm.
Or when a regional, a food safety professional within an organization is there, because you might as well be the health inspector. It's what's being done when they aren't around.
Right.
That's when the door is closed or my back is turned. Are you washing your hands right? Right? Are you properly cooking the chicken? In these, I think that's what some of these systems, and I don't mean to jump all over you here. That's where I think these systems can help provide even more legitimacy or awareness of the system works, or we need to reconfigure, or we need to rethink how we're trying to approach this, because for some reason it's not connecting, it's not clicking, people aren't doing it. So is it too hard? Is it too complicated? Do people just not want to do this? There's lots of different scenarios, but you at least have the information to start to ask the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at it we make decisions in the food industry on lots of different data sets, right? In sales data, month over month, year over year, on and what we're going to order and how much we expect to make yield wise, and just to reduce both waste and shrink. And we're moving towards it. And I think this is, Kiecha, your question, it gets to with this non-traditional piece, we're moving towards people valuing that data of how well are my systems being implemented, where we've been there for 20 or 30 years in other parts of a food business. And so I think to answer the second part of your question about how many of these individuals using non-traditional, I think it's very few. I think it's still really it's not so much that it's new technology, it's just not being implemented at a really high rate, and there's a lot of opportunity there. I have a friend who is an operator of a quick serve restaurant, and he often talks about how he makes decisions on staffing, about he knows how many things that he's going to sell based on what it's looked like in the past, and he's just now keying into how do I do the same thing for like thermometers? How do I do the same thing for food safety? Because we're measuring often in food safety the absence of something happening, and I like that's sort of historic, right? You don't want to, you're measuring no illnesses or no complaints, and where we really want to get to is how are we measuring how well we're implementing our system, how well we're addressing those risk factors. And so I think it's changing. But I think if you ask a lot of people, are you doing something that resembles active managerial control? A lot of people would say yes. I just don't think they're implementing it fully every day.
So to bring this discussion full circle, let's go back to that first slide with that $10 million price tag. My question is, if companies think active managerial control is too laborious or too expensive, and then also the use of technology is too much of an investment, what would your response be?
I'll give you my response as a food safety academic and consumer. That's not a place I want to eat. Mm-hmm. I mean, truthfully, I don't want to. I want to go to a place that is interested in investing and making sure that I don't get sick as a consumer. I also would want to eat at a place, or I want to buy food from a place that is actively looking for their own deficiencies, that they're not telling people, hey, we're the greatest out there. And in fact, some of my closest colleagues, the ones that I respect the most in the world of food safety, are often connecting with me, connecting with others, being like, I got these problems. How do I fix these? Not, hey, we're the greatest out there. And so to me, someone who says that they don't want to invest in it makes me cynically look at them and say, maybe you're not really interested in protecting your business and protecting public health as much as someone else who is going to invest that money because they see the value in it.
Mm-hmm. We've covered a lot of information today about the value and the power of active managerial control. And Eric and Ben, I think you've done a great job in explaining how there's really a solid case and a return on investment when a company chooses to be proactive and to create a truly solid food safety plan at both the system and the operational levels. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and a lot of the questions that we had posted earlier, you guys have addressed. So we really appreciate both of you answering the questions today and talking about active managerial control and really educating folks on the trends and what's happening out there with that. We will be posting a link to this webinar on our FoodLogiq website, which will include our slides as well as the audio recording of our discussion today. So I want to thank everybody again for attending. I hope you have a great day. And again, thank you, Eric and Ben, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.